I have always suspected Shifty Adam Schiff was a scam artist. And crooked Adam Schiff, now a senator, needs to be brought to justice. Schiff is on the record of having acknowledged that. He's like, oh yeah, I did it. Well, why'd you do it? It was a mistake. I'm just dumb. Well, that is true. Any person who applies for or votes or attempts to vote, a vote by mail ballot by fraudulently signing the name of someone else who's not qualified to vote, is a criminal. Censured former congressman, now current Senator Pencil Neck Adam Schiff, called out by President Trump today. Catching a lot of attention, and it's because of this complaint that was filed. You see this one, sent in by Christine Bish, B-I-S-H, and Darren Ellis back on October 16, 2024. And Trump's referencing some of the same details in this document, and it is against Shifty. And here's what Trump says, summarizing the entirety of his corruption. And as we remember, he did get censured for being a liar, and he should feel pathetic and terrible about that. I don't think he does, but he should. Now, Trump posted this. I have always suspected Shifty Adam Schiff was a scam artist. And now I learned that Fannie Mae's Financial Crimes Division have concluded that Adam Schiff has engaged in a sustained pattern of possible mortgage fraud. Fannie Mae's Financial Crimes Division. Adam Schiff said that his primary residence was in Maryland to get a cheaper mortgage and rip off America when he must live in California because he was a congressman from California. I always knew Adam Schiff was a crook. The fraud began with the refinance of his Maryland property in February 2009 and continued through multiple transactions until the Maryland property was correctly designated as his second home on October 13, 2020. Trump says mortgage fraud is very serious. And crooked Adam Schiff, now a senator, needs to be brought to justice. And it's true for this fraud and many other frauds that he's perpetrated upon America. Now, this report came out. We got this over from the USA Herald, and they wrote this back May 3rd, 2025. They say the ethics complaint is now hitting Adam Schiff. And he says, these are the same types of claims that mirror what late Tish was doing in New York. And here's the background. So they say in a developing scandal, a bombshell ethics complaint has been filed against Pencil Neck, saying voter fraud, mortgage fraud for 2 decades. Now, this was filed by Christine Bish and Darren Ellis. The complaint demands urgent action by the U.S. House Committees on Ethics and Oversight. Now, according to the document, they say Shifty violated Maryland and California law, very similar to what late Tish did. And the full complaint goes into the details, and let's read it straight from the source. Here's what came down against Pencil Neck, and Trump now calling this out, saying even the mortgage companies are digging into this. Saying Adam Schiff, in a complaint formally sent over to the U.S. House Ethics and Oversight and Judiciary Committees, back when Joe Biden was running things, said Adam Schiff, representative of California's congressional district and current candidate for Senate before he won it, was first elected to U.S. Congress in November 2001. And at the time, they owned a home in California, in Burbank on Amherst Drive. In May 2003, Shifty and Mrs. Shifty sold their home at the Amherst address, and then they purchased another home in Maryland. All right, so this home in California sold, goes over to Maryland on Windsor View. That sounds nice. The Maryland home was purchased with the acknowledgement and written affirmation that the home was a primary residence. Oh, that's interesting. Why would a California congressman be living in Maryland as his primary residence? In July of 2003, Shifty registered to vote as a California resident, claiming the home address of Andover and a fully furnished 1-bedroom, 1-bathroom apartment, which was roughly 700 square feet in size. All right. So now he's just renting some like tiny little shanty. He's like, oh no, I'm registered to vote in California. So he's kind of like what they call carpet bagging, where you just start picking up and creating a new, physical residence somewhere so you can run for office, even though you don't even like that district. You just know that you can win there. In 2009, Pencil Neck and Miss Pencil Neck refinanced their Maryland home on Windsor View, reaffirming it. They said, oh yeah, no, let's do this all over again. Refinance. That's our primary residence. Are you sure? Yeah. Also in 2009, Pencil was the subject of a U.S. ethics complaint relating to his home and residence status. The hearing itself resulted in Schiff admitting to wrongdoing, saying that he made a mistake, in reference to mortgage documents. In June 2009, these people are so shameless. Adam and Eve Schiff, and I just realized that, it's Adam and Eve Schiff. Oh my gosh, isn't that something? In June 2009, Adam and Pencilneck, the Pencilneck pair, purchased a 650 square foot, one bed, one bath condo in Burbank. At the time of the purchase, they had 2 minor children. It was just a fake residence. Review of available mortgage documents offer no distinction in regards to primary or secondary residence. Because it's a one bedroom shanty, they didn't care. Additionally, Schiff registered as a California voter to that condominium address aforementioned, right? So it's just totally fake. Now, in 2010, Pencil refinanced his home, reaffirming previous documents identified it as a primary residence. Adam and Eve Shifty, they proceeded to refinance the Maryland home located at the Windsor View in Maryland 2 additional times, and both times they refinanced, it was the primary residence. Are you sure it's still your primary residence? It's been like 10 years. Is it still the same one? Yeah, okay. Now here's Pencil. They say Maryland code says mortgage fraud is the following. If you're knowingly making any deliberate misrepresentation, you're busted, boy. In 2003, they did that. They sold their home in California. They moved. But Shifty registered to vote still in California, even though his primary residence was in Maryland. So why the conflict? Now, Schiff's residence and voting registration was called into question in a House committee hearing back in 2009. Pencil, despite claiming to live and represent the people in the state of California, filed and reaffirmed through his refinancing documents his primary residence was in Maryland. Schiff is on the record of having acknowledged that. He's like, oh yeah, I did it. Well, why'd you do it? It was a mistake. I'm just dumb. Well, that is true, but he's not that dumb. This was fraud. Maryland code also says, if there's a pattern of mortgage fraud, if there's 2 or more incidents of mortgage fraud that involve residential real properties, interrelated, having similar intents, and more. Now, in that same year the hearing was held, Shifty purchased another place in Burbank, California. This condo is still possessed by the Schiffs. Maryland property was refinanced in 10, 11, and 13, all 3 times. They said, Maryland, primary residence, 100% no problem. Thanks for the lower rate. And so they say, well, this looks like a pattern, saying there are 2 or more properties. They both satisfy the definition of warranting a violation of mortgage fraud because they're not accurate. Now, per language and documentation published on the California franchise tax website, tax fraud can also be claiming to be a resident of another state while residing in California. Schiff may also be guilty of tax fraud, they say, in the state of California stemming from his Maryland residency claim. It's important to note we need more information to see what he did with his taxes when he was filing there. What did he do with his taxes? If he's registering to vote at some fake address in California that he's literally paying for, right? Maybe he's staying there for a night or using it for his cavorting with MS-13 gang members or whatever. Then they, could claim that that is, I guess, a residence. But how can you put a whole family there? He was married and he had kids at the time, as they mentioned. So they were actually living, right, in practice and application. Everybody can say, oh, it's my primary residence. Oh, okay, well, where are you actually living? You have nothing there. Everything's over there. So it looks like you live there. Got it. So in 2009, around the same time as this House Ethics Committee, he purchased another condo, then registered to vote at that address. Now, it's important to note that the condo is roughly 650 square feet in size. Tiny. 1 bedroom, 1 bathroom. It's also of note he had 2 minor children, middle school at the time. He's like, well, he just had bunk beds for all of us. Information retained in the deed of trust in the home says the borrower's address was in Maryland, right? So even the mortgage documents are saying, he's living in Maryland. Now, California Elections Code says if a person moves to another state with the intention of making it his or her domicile, the voter loses his or her domicile in this state, California. If you go there, then you're not here. Schiff, having sold their home in California and purchasing it in Maryland, re-registered as voters in California. How can they do that if their primary residence is in Maryland, is according to their mortgage documents? Another fraud. Between 2003 and the purchase of condos, say they registered as voters in Burbank, and per the language in California code, it's plausible to believe that they were not entitled to claim domicile in the state when applying the surrounding facts that they purchased in Maryland, a much bigger home in Maryland for 2 children, whereas in here in California, it was 1 bedroom. It was just basically a fake address so we could register there because he's a fraud. In order to qualify as a candidate to represent in California, someone has to actually be a resident of California. And in fact, 2004, 6, and 8, he was not a resident of California. He sold his home and then moved to another state. Residence means domicile. Domicile means where your habitation is fixed, where you're actually there. And going through the rules, they say they remained registered voters in California despite being residents of Maryland from 2003. California election code says they're not entitled to vote, much less be a representative. Now, it has been understood that the pencilnecks, as residents of Maryland, have been voting absentee in California. Any person who applies for or votes or attempts to vote, a vote by mail ballot by fraudulently signing the name of someone else who's not qualified to vote, is a criminal and can result in 2 or 3 years of imprisonment and a fine. Now, Adam is presently, at the time they wrote this, was running for Senate. He ran there because Californians like, oh man, we love fraudsters. He's our fraudster. And as long as he's our fraudster and he's really good at it, we'll just keep electing him to higher office. They would run him for president if they could because he's so fraudulent. That's like their number one thing. They don't care. So they write here, Maryland is also saying that he's currently running as a representative of California to be the senator, but he's not even a resident there. He's maintained his place of primary residence is in Maryland. And they cite a bunch of law here. Any individual who's domiciled and over and on. And so therefore, he is invalid and illegal. They give us a timeline and articulate all the details and all the references. You can just look at the deed of trust. You can look at the refinancing documents. You can look at all of the voter registration forms. You can look at individual grants. It's all documented. Pencil neck is busted, and Trump is calling him out.